Why broke people buy Gucci? It's not stupidity, it's economics. There is a woman named Keisha standing in a Nordstrom in Atlanta on a Saturday afternoon, holding a Gucci belt that costs $450. Keisha makes $31,000 a year as a receptionist. She has $812 in her checking account. Her rent is due in 9 days. The belt costs more than half of what is in her account. Keisha is going to buy the belt. And every person watching this video just made a judgment about Keisha. You either thought she is irresponsible, a victim of marketing, or trying to impress people she cannot afford to impress. Every single one of those thoughts is wrong. Keisha is making the calculated economic decision, more rational than anything in a textbook. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why. Not to excuse or romanticize it, but to show you the math. And the math will make you uncomfortable, because it says Keisha might be right. Let me tell you what happened the Tuesday before Keisha walked into Nordstrom. Keisha had a job interview not at another dental office, but at a property management company. The position was leasing consultant. Salary, $44,000 with benefits. $13,000 more per year. Health insurance she currently does not have. A 401k match she currently does not get. This job would change Keisha's next 5 years. She prepared, researched, practiced, picked her best outfit. She showed up 10 minutes early and waited in the lobby. While she waited, she watched 2 other candidates arrive. Both of them were wearing clothes that Keisha recognized, not the brand. The price point, the fabric, the cut, the shoes. One woman was carrying a bag that Keisha knew cost at least $800 because Keisha had looked at that bag online and closed the tab. The other woman was wearing a watch that Keisha could not identify but could feel. There is a frequency that expensive things vibrate at, and Keisha could feel it from across the lobby. Keisha looked down at her own outfit. It was clean, it was professional, it was from Target. And in that moment, Keisha felt something that no economics textbook has a formula for, but every person who has ever been the poorest person in a room knows in their body. She felt visible. Not seen, visible. There is a difference. Being seen is when people look at you and perceive you. Being visible is when people look at you and perceive your tax bracket. Keisha did not get the job. She does not know why. Maybe the other candidates were more qualified. Maybe the interviewer preferred someone else's answers. Maybe it had nothing to do with the clothes, but Keisha will never know that. What Keisha knows is what she felt in that lobby. And what she felt was a door closing before she opened her mouth. The Saturday after the interview, Keisha is standing in Nordstrom holding a Gucci belt. The belt is not for Saturday. The belt is not for the club. The belt is not for Instagram. The belt is for the next lobby. The belt is a key, and the door it opens is the door that closed on Tuesday. Keisha is not buying a belt. Keisha is buying the absence of that feeling. The feeling of being visible. The feeling of being priced before being heard. The feeling of sitting in a chair in a lobby knowing that the room has already decided what you can afford and therefore what you are worth, and therefore whether you belong. The $450 is not the price of leather and a buckle. It is the price of not being eliminated before the conversation starts. And if you have never been the poorest person in a room where the room decides your future, you will never understand that price. But if you have, you already know that $450 is cheap. I need you to hold 2 things in your mind at the same time. The first thing is that Keisha cannot afford the belt. That is objectively true. $812 in checking, rent due in 9 days, $31,000 salary. The belt is a financial mistake by every conventional measure. The second thing is that Keisha is not stupid. Keisha did not fail to do the subtraction. Keisha did the subtraction before she walked into the store. Keisha knows exactly what the belt costs and exactly what she has and exactly what is due and when. Keisha is making a decision that prioritizes a future earning opportunity over a current financial obligation. She is investing in the signal that gets her into the room, where the salary is $44,000 instead of $31,000. The $13,000 difference in annual salary over 5 years is $65,000. The belt costs $450. If the belt moves the needle even fractionally on one interview in the next 12 months, the return on investment is astronomical. Keisha is not being irrational. Keisha is being rational inside a system that is irrational. And the system is the part nobody wants to talk about. Now multiply Keisha by millions. There are millions of Keishas, millions of Jeromes, millions of people who make between $25,000 and $40,000 a year, who own at least one item that costs more than a week's pay. And every single one of them has been called irresponsible by someone who has never had to buy their way into a room. The financial advice industry has built an empire on telling these people to stop buying lattes and designer belts and start investing in index funds. And that advice is not wrong in a vacuum. In a vacuum where every person is evaluated purely on merit and credentials and experience, the belt is a waste of money. But we do not live in a vacuum. We live in a system where a study published in the Journal of Consumer Research found that people wearing luxury brands are perceived as higher status, more competent, and more worthy of cooperation and employment than people wearing non-luxury brands with identical qualifications. We live in a system where the signal costs money and the absence of the signal costs more. The economics of what Keisha is doing has a name, several names actually. And none of them are stupidity. The first name is signaling theory. In 1973, an economist named Michael Spence published a paper that won him the Nobel Prize. The paper argued that in markets where buyers cannot directly observe the quality of what they are buying, sellers invest in signals that communicate quality indirectly. The classic example is education. An employer cannot directly observe how productive a worker will be. So the worker gets a degree. The degree does not necessarily make the worker more productive. The degree signals that the worker was capable of completing a 4-year program, which correlates with traits the employer values. The degree is expensive. The expense is the point. If the signal were free, everyone would send it, and it would communicate nothing. The cost of the signal is what makes it credible. A Gucci belt operates on exactly the same principle. In a social and professional environment where people cannot directly observe your competence, your reliability, your earning potential, or your future trajectory, they read signals. The clothes you wear, the watch on your wrist, the bag you carry, the car you drive, these are not vanity, they are information. Expensive information. And the expense is what makes the information credible. A $450 belt says I have $450 of discretionary income, which says I am not in survival mode, which says I am stable, which says I am safe to hire, safe to promote, safe to invest in, safe to trust with responsibility. The belt is a credential. It is worn on the waist instead of hung on a wall, but it functions identically. The second name is Veblen goods. In 1899, economist Thorstein Veblen published The Theory of the Leisure Class. Veblen identified goods where demand increases as price increases, violating the basic law of demand. For normal goods, demand goes down when price goes up. For Veblen goods, the opposite is true. A Gucci belt at $45 would not serve Keisha's purpose. It communicates nothing. The $4-$100- and $50 price is not a barrier to Keisha's goal. It is the mechanism of her goal. The price is the product. The leather is merely the delivery system for the signal. Veblen understood in 1899 what the financial advice industry still refuses to understand in 2026. Conspicuous consumption is not a psychological defect. It is a strategic response to a social system. A system that allocates opportunity based on perceived status. The consumption is conspicuous because it must be. A signal that nobody sees is a signal that nobody reads. The third name is the poverty premium, and it works in reverse here in a way nobody talks about. The poverty premium is the well-documented phenomenon that poor people pay more for the same goods and services. Higher interest rates, higher insurance premiums, higher per-unit costs at convenience stores. More fees, more deposits, more penalties. The poverty premium extracts money from people who have the least of it. But there is a second poverty premium that is invisible. It is the cost of not signaling. The cost of walking into a room without the belt. The cost of showing up to the interview in Target when the other candidates are in theory and Tory Burch. This premium is not charged at the register. It is charged at the hiring desk. It is charged in the salary offer that comes in $5,000 lower because the candidate did not present as a $44,000 employee. It is charged in the promotion. That goes to the colleague who looks the part. It is charged in the client meeting, where the person in the off-brand suit is unconsciously perceived as less authoritative than the person in Tom Ford. This invisible premium has no receipt. It generates no transaction record. It appears in no study of consumer spending. But it is real, and it is enormous, and it is the reason Keisha is standing in Nordstrom doing math. Math that the financial advice industry refuses to do. Let me give you the actual numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey shows that households in the lowest income quintile, earning less than $28,000 per year, spend approximately 5% of their income on apparel. Households in the highest income quintile spend approximately 3%. The poor spend a higher percentage. The standard interpretation is that this is irrational. The correct interpretation is that the poor are paying a higher percentage because the signal costs the same absolute amount regardless of income. A Gucci belt costs $450, whether you make $30,000 or $300,000. For the person making $30,000, that belt represents 1.5% of annual gross income. For the person making $300,000, it represents 0.15%. The signal is 10 times more expensive for the poor person as a percentage of income. And the poor person needs the signal more because they are the one being evaluated, screened, and sorted by appearance. In lobbies and waiting rooms and interviews and client meetings, the person making $300,000 already has the job. The person making $30,000 is trying to get it. The person who needs the signal most pays the most for it. That is not irrationality, that is a tax. A tax on being poor in a system that judges by appearance and charges for the appearance that gets you judged favorably. A study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that job applicants who were perceived as higher socioeconomic status received callback rates that were 37% higher than applicants perceived as lower socioeconomic status with identical resumes, 37%. That means for every 100 applications Keisha sends, the version of Keisha wearing the Gucci belt gets 37 more callbacks than the version of Keisha wearing the Target belt, 37 more chances to interview, 37 more chances to demonstrate competence, 37 more chances to land the $44,000 job. The belt costs $450. 37 additional callbacks on a job that pays $13,000 more per year is a potential return of $481,000 over a career. The math is not even close. The belt is the single highest return investment available to Keisha, not the index fund, not the savings account, not the emergency fund, the belt. Because the belt is the thing that gets her into the room, where the index fund and the savings account and the emergency fund become possible. Here is where I need you to get uncomfortable. Because everything I have said so far has been about Keisha's decision. And Keisha's decision is rational. But the system that makes her decision rational is insane. The system says that a piece of leather with a specific letter on the buckle changes how a human being is evaluated for employment. The system says that the same resume, the same skills, the same experience, the same answers to the same interview questions produce different outcomes based on the brand of the belt, The system is not Keisha's fault. The system is the reason Keisha exists. The system has a name too. Economists call it statistical discrimination. When an evaluator, a hiring manager, a loan officer, a landlord, a client cannot perfectly observe the quality of the person in front of them, they use observable proxies. Race is a proxy, gender is a proxy, age is a proxy, and appearance, specifically the economic signal embedded in appearance, is a proxy. The hiring manager in the lobby is not consciously thinking, that candidate's belt cost $450. Therefore, she is competent. The hiring manager is processing a gestalt, a total impression, and the total impression is assembled from dozens of microsignals that the brain reads and integrates below conscious awareness: fabric quality, shoe condition, accessory brand recognition, grooming precision, fit and tailoring. Each signal is small. The aggregate is decisive. Research in the journal Psychological Science found that observers could accurately estimate a stranger's socioeconomic status from a photograph shown for 100 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds, 1/10 of a second. The judgment is made before the handshake, before the greeting, before the first question. The interview begins and ends in the lobby, and the lobby is reading the belt. This is where the cruelty of the system becomes visible. The financial advice industry tells Keisha to save the $450. Put it in a high-yield savings account. Start an emergency fund. Invest in an index fund. This advice assumes that Keisha's problem is a savings problem. Keisha's problem is not a savings problem. Keisha's problem is an access problem. Keisha cannot save her way into the room. The room has a dress code, and the dress code has a price, and the price is not optional. Telling Keisha to save the $450 instead of buying the belt is telling Keisha to save $450, while forfeiting the 37% increase in callback rates that the belt provides. It is telling her to optimize the pennies, while ignoring the dollars. It is telling her to build an emergency fund on $31,000 a year, instead of investing in the signal that gets her to $44,000 a year, where the emergency fund actually becomes possible. The advice is not wrong. The advice is sequenced incorrectly. You cannot save your way out of poverty. If the saving requires you to remain in the income bracket, that makes saving impossible. Something has to break the bracket first. For Keisha, the belt is the bracket breaker, not because the belt is magic, because the system is broken. And the belt is the tax the broken system charges for entry. Let me be clear about who built this system. Because the system did not build itself. The luxury industry spends approximately $15 billion per year on advertising globally. That advertising does not just sell products to rich people. It trains everyone, rich and poor, to associate specific brands with specific human qualities: competence, taste, intelligence, discipline, success, worth. The training begins in childhood and it never stops. By the time Keisha is 25, she has been exposed to approximately 5 million advertisements. And a significant percentage of those advertisements have taught her and everyone who will ever evaluate her that the presence of certain brands signals the presence of certain qualities, and the absence of those brands signals the absence of those qualities. The luxury industry did not just create a product. It created the evaluation system that makes the product necessary. It manufactured the disease and then sold the cure. And then the financial advice industry looked at the people buying the cure and called them irresponsible. The racial dimension of this cannot be ignored because it is the room where the signal costs most. And the penalty for not sending it is the highest. A study published in Management Science found that black job applicants faced a callback penalty that was reduced when signals of higher socioeconomic status were present in their application materials and appearance. The signal did not eliminate the penalty. It reduced it, which means for black applicants, the luxury item is not just a status signal. It is a partial countermeasure against racial discrimination. The Gucci belt on a black woman in a job interview is doing double duty. It is signaling economic status, and it is partially offsetting the negative status inference that the evaluator's unconscious bias assigns to her race. The belt is not a luxury, it is armor. And telling a black woman in America to take off the armor and save the money instead is telling her to walk into a system that is already biased against her with one fewer tool for navigating that bias. The advice is not just financially naive, it is structurally ignorant. It ignores the specific tax that the intersection of race and class imposes on the people least able to pay it. The system also runs on a second mechanism that is even more invisible. It is called the Matthew effect. Named after the biblical verse,